What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we are going over the top 50 wide receivers, and I'm going to let you know why you should draft each one of them. I'll be making a small case for each one, focusing on only the positive points about them, and running through these players at a very rapid pace, and the goal is to get through the top 50. Before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which quarterback had the highest single week fantasy performance. The correct answer was Aaron Rodgers in week 7. Dawson Padgett, you got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, which fantasy tight end had the highest single week fantasy performance of the entire 2019 season? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Also, guys, be sure to check out our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Our draft package is live, and the site itself is loaded with free information that you are bound to find interesting. So even if you're not a member, consider checking it out. Link for that is in the description box below. We do have 50 players to go over though, so I'm gonna hop right into it, and the first player is obviously Michael Thomas. Not much needs to really be said about Michael Thomas. Not only did he lead the league in receptions last season, but he broke the all-time single season record for receptions. An obvious favorite to lead the league in this area once again, playing with a future Hall of Fame quarterback, somebody who he didn't have for the entire season last year. Despite that fact, he still was on that record-breaking pace. If anything were to happen to Drew Brees once again, now they have Jameis Winston behind him, obviously a more careless player with the ball, somebody who has had a consistent gunslinger mentality. Those types of tendencies do end up resulting in more shootouts, which could ultimately even help the fantasy value of Michael Thomas. Up next, we have Davante Adams, the only other wide receiver we have as a tier 1 wide receiver along with Michael Thomas. Clearly, we're very high on him. Easily one of the safest wide receivers. 26 of his last 33 games have resulted in double-digit fantasy point performances, and he's one of the top receivers when it comes to heavy volume and usage in the red zone, paired with a quarterback who's been historically one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the league in this area of the field. Up next, Tyreek Hill, one of the most physically gifted wide receivers in the league. If he ever were to receive Michael Thomas type targets, this is a player who could literally go for like 2,500 receiving yards, and while that's not a realistic expectation, he still has one of the best quarterbacks passing him the ball in Patrick Mahomes. He's coming off a down season, and it wouldn't surprise anyone if he did finish as the first wide receiver overall. Julio Jones, he's a player who's always a threat to lead the league in receiving yardage. He is going to get heavy volume. This is also a team that leads the league in vacated targets. While his overall opportunity isn't going to increase all that much, he already demands one of the highest target market shares in the entire league. But even with that, that just adds to his overall upside. He now has 6 straight seasons posting at least 1,390 receiving yards, and there is no chance that this trend comes to an end barring any injury. Moving on, we have Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Finally did have his breakout season in his 3rd year as a pro. Always looked good in limited opportunity, so we always knew he had it in him, just never really was given the full chance to see it on the field. We saw it in full effect in 2019, and the Buccaneers are going to try to capitalize on that with Tom Brady for 2020. Chris Godwin is likely to play a sizable role in the slot, a position that Tom Brady has heavily relied on throughout his tenure as a pro. This should make any growing pains associated with having a new quarterback, it should result in them being pretty seamless, and Chris Godwin, we already know, is one hell of a player. DeAndre Hopkins comes in at number 6, and he has been a perennial elite wide receiver when it comes to fantasy production for several years now with 14 different quarterbacks. He now has Kyler Murray, arguably one of the best quarterbacks he's had throwing him the ball throughout his career, and he's on an offense that, despite ranking 22nd in the league in overall plays ran, is still going to have an emphasis and remain focused in trying to increase the team's total opportunities on the offensive side of the ball. The next player we have is Kenny Golladay of the Detroit Lions, and while he didn't get a massive amount of targets in 2019, ranking 21st in this area, he still was a wide receiver 1 with or without Matthew Stafford. That does show a level of safety, and we definitely should not be surprised when we see his volume take an uptick for the 2020 season. A healthy Matthew Stafford is definitely something that's going to help this overall offense. And when it comes to targets and receptions in the passing game, Kenny Golladay is easily going to be the leading receiver on this team. So even if he does see some regression in the touchdown department, he should make up for most, if not all of that, through a heightened receiving floor. Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, while Tom Brady's deep ball isn't quite what it used to be, and Mike Evans is going to play the primary deep threat on this team, his large frame still supports a very important role in the red zone, and Brady should still be an overall improvement on the catchable target percentage on deep passes. Definitely is going to end up being a player who performs more boom bust than some of the other wide receivers in this area, but ultimately he should still finish inside the top 12 wide receivers, which means even though he has these bad games, the good games not only will make up for that in the long run, these are the types of games that have the potential to be week winning type performances. After that, we have Allen Robinson of the Chicago Bears, easily one of my favorite value picks at the wide receiver position early. Coming in at wide receiver 9, it may feel like you don't have a lot of value to extract from him, but he was already in a top 10 position when it came to volume at the receiver position in all areas of the field. We are expecting improvement offensively from this team overall now that they have Nick Foles competing for quarterback snaps, and now that Allen Robinson has broken out for that team, any improvements offensively are going to directly benefit his production. Odell Beckham Jr. comes in next, and he's coming off a season in which he compiled his worst statistics as a pro. He was year one in a new offense, and typically, even to the best receivers, they do struggle transitioning teams. We usually see a massive uptick in production and involvement in the offense heading into the second year in the same offense, so an increase in targets and efficiency is definitely something we can expect for 2020. Odell Beckham Jr. as an athlete is already one of the most talented receivers in the league, so any uptick in efficiency and involvement is going to have much more upside with Odell Beckham than it would for many other wide receivers being drafted in this range. Juju Smith-Schuster out of Pittsburgh is the next receiver we have. Similarly to Odell Beckham, he was coming off of a down season, also dealing with injuries, not only his own injuries, but injuries to the quarterback position. Big Ben is reportedly healthier than ever. He looks the part. And now we're getting a draft day discount on a player who is going several spots higher just a season ago. Clearly, he's going to lead this team in targets while healthy and on the field, so we could easily see him outperforming this draft position so long as himself and the pieces around him remain healthy. Rounding out the top 12 is Amari Cooper of the Dallas Cowboys. He does have the luxury of being the leading receiver on a Dallas Cowboys offense, one that has the potential to compete for one of the highest scoring offenses in the league this season. Dak Prescott himself does tend to play to the pieces around him, and it's undeniable he has the most talent surrounding him than he's ever had in his entire career. This should lead to much more scoring opportunities, which will find their way over to Amari Cooper, and to his credit, the consistency issues that we had seen plague him throughout his career in Oakland, while they're still there, they are getting a little better. Adam Thielen comes in next out of Minnesota, and he's one of my favorite targets in the early rounds because you know he has a strong sense of security when it comes to volume. With Stephon Diggs out of the picture, he is the main receiver that has the greatest connection with quarterback Kirk Cousins, and while the overall passing volume is low on this offense and is expected to remain somewhat low, the percentage of targets that are funneled to the wide receiver position will make up for that. So Adam Thielen not only brings a sense of security to your team, we've already seen him produce top 5 numbers, and with Diggs out of town, it shouldn't surprise anyone to see him produce like that once again. DJ Moore is being drafted as a high-end wide receiver too, but can perform easily as a top 5 wide receiver for the 2020 season. I don't think a wide receiver 1 finish would surprise anybody, but a top 5 wide receiver finish is also in his range of outcomes. He did struggle in the area of touchdowns in 2019, an area where Teddy Bridgewater was performing as a top 10 quarterback when it came to rating in that area of the field. To put it into perspective, that was an area Kyle Allen ranked 48th in. Any improvement to red zone passing efficiency is going to directly benefit the leading receiver on this team, which is DJ Moore. So his low touchdown totals that we saw in year 1 and year 2 do definitely have the potential to increase this upcoming season, and if he's in that 8 to 10 touchdown range, he has a very strong chance at finishing inside the top 5. AJ Brown is coming up next, and he's one of the few receivers in the league who can produce top 12 numbers despite having a target total outside of the top 20. The involvement for Brown is destined to increase this year. The coaching staff has been very vocal about wanting to get him more involved in all possible ways, and with a player as talented as AJ Brown, the sky's the limit with that type of volume. Calvin Ridley is the next player that we have, and I understand it's difficult to draft a receiver who is going to play second fiddle in their offense when there's still receivers on the board who are going to be the main target in their offenses. If you can see past that, what you have is a player who has all of the makings of a breakout player for the 2020 season despite not ever compiling over 900 receiving yards. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a player who can eclipse 1,150 receiving yards, who also has the potential to post double-digit touchdowns. Robert Woods is our next player, and Woods is very similar to DJ Moore. He produced at a very high level, but never really got it done when it came to scoring in the end zone. He finished the season with 2 touchdowns. No other receiver inside the top 30 in targets had less than that total. Either way, you're still landing a receiver who is top 10 in targets for 2019 and lost a key contributor in Brandon Cooks. If he can see some positive regression and reach pay dirt on more occasions for 2020, it's a guarantee he will easily smash this ADP. Moving on, we have Cooper Kupp, who is a player who kind of played like he had the tale of 2 seasons, but we still know he has the upside to produce as a top 10 receiver in the league. Unlike Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp is a strong scorer, so even if his target totals are lower than that of Robert Woods, he should still be producing fantasy points at a higher rate than that of Robert Woods when it comes to fantasy points per target. So if you're in this range and don't yet have a wide receiver and are lacking somebody that does have wide receiver 1 upside, Cooper Kupp is a very safe bet to compete for that. Courtland Sutton is our next player, and if he performs exactly as he did in 2019, you're not going to be disappointing in drafting him where he's currently going. He's also on an ascending offense that added very valuable pieces like Melvin Gordon and Jerry Jeudy to the receiving core, which could ultimately result in more sustained drives and more scoring opportunities. He is also coming into his 3rd year, the perennial breakout year for wide receivers, and he's shown improvement in each season as a pro. Rounding out the top 20 is Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks. Undeniably, he has a great connection and chemistry with Russell Wilson, and this is also a team that could struggle in the running game, leading to more passing opportunities for this upcoming season. The backfield is led by Chris Carson, who is coming off of a major hip injury, and Rashad Penny is likely to start on the pup. If they're without their main rushers deep into the season, the pass attempts for Russell Wilson are bound to increase, and Tyler Lockett's not the type of player to need a massive amount of volume to produce high-level fantasy points. Keenan Allen comes in next, and if you are looking for an alpha receiver in their offense who could potentially be undervalued, look no further than Keenan Allen. While the overall passing volume on this offense is bound to decrease, the ADP for Keenan Allen is also at an all-time low as well. Tyrod Taylor has already proven to be able to produce wide receiver 1 numbers for a receiver on an offense in the past, so we can't automatically count out Keenan Allen for being able to do this himself. DJ Chark, similarly to AJ Brown, Odell Beckham, and Tyreek Hill, is a player who has game-breaking upside and is a threat to score on any given play. He showed a strong connection with Gardner Minshew, who is going to be the starter for the foreseeable future, and prior to Minshew getting benched for Nick Foles, DJ Chark was already producing mid-tier wide receiver 1 production. If they can regain some of that magic that they showed with Minshew Mania, DJ Chark could once again perform in that same area for 2020. Devontae Parker is easily going to smash this ADP so long as Ryan Fitzpatrick remains the starter. He was a top 3 wide receiver when looking at all receivers through their final 7 games, and when targeting players for the upcoming season, you always want to target the guys who were trending up towards the tail end of the prior season. While he may not see the exact same target market share with Preston Williams healthy and on the field, you're not paying for 2019 production whatsoever, making the draft selection of Devontae Parker somewhat of a sneaky value. Terry McLaurin is our next wide receiver, and he's coming off of a very productive rookie season. While he didn't eclipse 1,000 receiving yards, which we've all had the luxury of seeing when it comes to rookie receivers, he still posted amazing numbers when it came to advanced metrics and even led the league in contested catch rate. The team is very aware that through the receiving game, it has to go through Terry McLaurin, so him taking a step forward in overall volume and production for 2020, it's virtually a guarantee. Moving on, we have DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks, and Metcalf is one of the most physically gifted athletes we've seen in many years. He's basically the Derrick Henry of receivers, except he's also a guy that has 4.3 speed. His route running tree, it's very minimal, but he's still very successful on the routes he runs. The overall passing volume on this offense isn't expected to be all that high, but he is playing with a quarterback who has historically been one of the best quarterbacks in converting pass attempts and targets into touchdowns. He ranks 9th all time, and that's a trend that will definitely continue for the upcoming year. T.Y. Hilton is definitely not getting any respect this season, hardly ranking inside the top 30 when it comes to ADP, but the downgrade in quarterback, there really isn't one at all. Phillip Rivers has historically played a more gunslinger style of football, which has a much better tendency to be fantasy friendly for wide receivers, much more so than we saw with the play style of Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett was already able to allow Hilton to produce as a high-end wide receiver 2, back in wide receiver 1, so it can't surprise anybody if T.Y. Hilton is able to do the same with his new quarterback. Stephon Diggs is up next, and this is a player who has dealt with his fair share of injuries, was a little disgruntled last year in Minnesota, but on this new team, he does have a chip on his shoulder. John Brown was also able to produce as a wide receiver 2 for fantasy last season, and say what you want about the skills of John Brown, he definitely is no Stephon Diggs. New receivers do typically struggle in year 1 on new offenses, but considering Josh Allen has no fear in throwing the ball up in the air and relying on big plays, Stephon Diggs is just the type of receiver to find himself in many good situations throughout the season. Jarvis Landry is next, hardly ranking inside the top 30 when it comes to ADP, which is pretty disrespectful considering he finished inside the top 12. You basically know what you're going to get with this player, so if you value safety, drafting him in this range could be very beneficial depending on your roster composition. While we're not expecting the same amount of upside as we saw in 2019, we have still yet to see Odell Beckham break out for this team, and until that day happens, there still is a range of outcomes in which Jarvis Landry is the leading receiver for the Browns. Up next, we have AJ Green of the Cincinnati Bengals, and this is a player who just hasn't been able to stay healthy. If you can guarantee us 16 healthy games from AJ Green, I think it's safe to say you have a wide receiver 1 on your hands. That's the type of upside he brings to the table, and considering you can nab him as a flex level player or potentially a bench player depending on how wide receiver heavy you draft, if he hits his ceiling, that could be a league winning type of draft selection. Unfortunately, the odds are very low of him remaining healthy, but you're not going to invest heavy draft capital in order to take that risk. Tyler Boyd ranks 7th in targets but 23rd in fantasy points, so he's not classified as the type of player to do a lot with a little. However, none of the receiving options on his team have a track record of being healthy. John Ross and AJ Green, the 2 major competitors for targets in this offense, they played less games than they've actually started over the past 2 seasons, a trend that is likely to continue for 2020. If that situation were to happen, we could see Tyler Boyd step into a situation in which he's the leading target on this offense, and Joe Burrow is definitely an upgrade over the quarterbacks that they had last season. Coming up next is Michael Gallup of the Dallas Cowboys, and if you guys have not drafted a piece of this Dallas Cowboys offense, Michael Gallup is a good value where he's going to get the job done and get your piece. He already broke out last season, and with Amari Cooper garnering the lead coverage on the opposing defense and CeeDee Lamb garnering his own level of attention, Michael Gallup could be in a prime position to repeat the types of numbers he was producing last season. Julian Edelman is the next player up, and even though he's ranked outside the top 30 when it comes to ADP, I don't believe that everything has fully settled from the news of Cam Newton now leading this team from the quarterback position. With Cam Newton, this is a significant upgrade to the overall offense and what we can expect, and Julian Edelman is the most likely candidate to lead this team in targets and receptions. Is he going to produce the same numbers he was producing with Tom Brady? I doubt it, but consistent wide receiver 2/flex numbers from Julian Edelman is definitely something you can expect this year. The next player we have is Marquise Brown of the Baltimore Ravens, and he definitely has the makings of a potential breakout for this upcoming season. He's on an offense led by the reigning league MVP winner, and despite playing on a very minimal amount of snaps in 2019, he still led this team from the receiver position in targets. Definitely a trend we can see continuing, and he also had a screw removed from a surgically repaired foot, definitely something that hindered his production for the 2019 season. All signs are a go for 2020 though, so get as many shares as you can of Marquise Brown. Marvin Jones is the next player up, and he's one of the few players being drafted in this range that has a very low bust rate. It's unlikely that he's going to fully disappoint your team, and he's always somebody you can start in the flex in a positive matchup. He may not have wide receiver 1 upside like we had seen several seasons ago, but when all is said and done and you look at his end of season production, if he does play 16 games, he should easily smash where he's going in drafts. Will Fuller may not have ever eclipsed 670 receiving yards in his career, but he's still a player that has high-end wide receiver 1 upside. His massive performance in 2019 led all receivers in fantasy points for any single week and was actually the highest over the past decade of any single week fantasy performance. If he can stay healthy with DeAndre Hopkins out of the way, he is the receiver with the best connection with Deshaun Watson currently on the roster, so the upside is massive. The next player is the other wide receiver for the Houston Texans, and that's Brandon Cooks, who we have seen have wide receiver 1 upside in several different offenses. Yes, he's coming off of his worst statistical season as a pro, but he was also battling injuries, and a change of scenery is definitely good for the receiver who has proven to be a journeyman. Wide receiver 1 numbers from a solid quarterback like Deshaun Watson is definitely something we could potentially see this season, especially when factoring on the poor health of Will Fuller. This could leave Brandon Cooks in a prime position to be the leading receiver on this offense. Christian Kirk is the next receiver up, and he did lead this team in targets per game in 2019. DeAndre Hopkins is now an Arizona Cardinal, so that's unlikely to repeat itself, but that doesn't mean he can't be successful playing in a specific role. He is still a big play threat and is likely still going to produce on special teams, so considering you only have to invest in him draft capital of a wide receiver 4, the risk of investment in acquiring this deep play threat is actually quite minimal. John Brown is our next player, and he is coming in outside of the top 40 wide receivers, and if I'm being frank, I could definitely see him exceeding this draft position. The only problem is his games are going to be much more boom and bust and harder to predict week to week, but overall he's destined to be a player to exceed what you're paying for him on draft day. If you're able to time out and line up the games that he performs his best in and get him in your starting lineup in these games, he's definitely a flex level player who does bring to the table week winning type upside. Deontay Johnson is next, and he's coming off of a very successful rookie season, one in which he led the league in target separation, and he did that all while playing with complete crap at the quarterback position. Now Big Ben is back and looking his healthiest we've seen him in recent years, and Deontay Johnson looks to be filling that second wide receiver role, a role that's been very fruitful for fantasy production for several years. Think as recent as 2018, where both Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster were both wide receiver ones. While we can't necessarily expect that type of upside, Deontay Johnson definitely has a strong chance to break out for the 2020 season. Moving on, we have Deebo Samuel, who is coming off of a break in his foot. The recovery time is somewhere around 10 weeks, which would line up perfectly with the start of the NFL season. Unfortunately for him, history has shown us that receivers coming back within 10 weeks of this injury tend to require a second surgery. Deebo Samuel is a freak of an athlete though, so if he is able to recover and play on the field as early as week 1, there is no doubt in my mind that he is going to perform better than where he's being drafted, so long as he can remain healthy. Jamison Crowder is the next receiver up, and he is one of my favorite draft selections in the later rounds. He was 16th in targets in 2019, his first year on the New York Jets offense, and even though the Jets will have more pieces in the receiving game at their disposal this year, he still has a strong chance to improve in both efficiency as well as volume. Many of the stats he was able to compile in 2019 were career highs for Jamison Crowder, and he's always been a player we have looked at as one with an exceptional skill set. Moving on, we have Darius Slayton of the New York Giants, a player who is destined to lead this team from snaps from the outside position. He already proved to be one of the better receivers in the league when it came to translating targets into fantasy points, so if he's going to be on the field much more this upcoming season, this is a player who has a massive amount of upside. His connection with Daniel Jones actually proved to be one of the best connections out of any receivers on this team, and he's also the only receiver on this offense who isn't at a heightened risk of injury. Moving on, we have Mike Williams of the LA Chargers, and whenever there's a new quarterback, their favorite target sometimes changes. Even though Phillip Rivers' favorite target was Keenan Allen, there is the potential that Tyrod Taylor leans more on Mike Williams. When banking on a player in the later rounds and not knowing what the potential volume is for the upcoming season, banking on a player who doesn't require a ton of volume is one of the better bets you can take. Mike Williams was one of the league leaders in yards per reception last season, and he already has had a season in which he scored double-digit touchdowns. Both of those skill sets have the ability to translate to high levels of fantasy points without requiring a ton of volume. The next player we have is Sterling Shepard of the New York Giants, and Sterling Shepard has been the leading receiver on this team ever since Odell Beckham had left. Daniel Jones is also a quarterback everyone expects to take a step forward for the 2020 season, so what better way to get a piece of this New York Giants offense than a low-risk investment of Sterling Shepard? While he hasn't stayed healthy for much of his career, he has played 16 consecutive games in every other season. If that trend were to continue, maybe we see 16 games out of him again this season. Emanuel Sanders is the next receiver up, and I'm not going to lie, I'm not super excited about Sanders. He's definitely on the tail end of his career and will be overshadowed by receiver Michael Thomas. We also haven't seen Drew Brees get many weapons consistently involved outside of the leading receiver on this team for a few seasons now. Emanuel Sanders is still one of the more talented wide receivers in the league, I would say, but considering he has been coming off of several injuries, it's still unknown if he can see him put it together on the field. If anything were to happen to Michael Thomas though, it's undeniable Emanuel Sanders has wide receiver 1 upside. The next receiver we have is Anthony Miller of the Chicago Bears, and Miller really started to pop off towards the tail end of last season. He definitely battled a fair share of injuries in the 2019 season, but when we saw him healthy and on the field, he performed very well. We're also expecting this offense to take some steps forward for the 2020 season, and in order for that expectation to become a reality, that's going to come on the back of an uptick in production from Anthony Miller. CeeDee Lamb is the next receiver on this list, and if you do want to get a piece of this Dallas Cowboys offense, well, here's one of your cheapest places to do so. CeeDee Lamb is also a very talented wide receiver. If you watch his play on the field and his practicing off the field, the dude's an animal, and while he may not get a massive opportunity share this upcoming season, there still is a ton of vacated targets that are left available from the Dallas Cowboys, so expecting him to get 80 to 100 targets is definitely in the realm of possibility. And we saw AJ Brown just a season ago perform as a mid-grade wide receiver too, despite only compiling 84 targets. Alright guys, we just went over a ton of players, but that's going to do it for today's video. If you did enjoy it, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.